The hall smelled of wet stone and burning pine, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes long after you left. I stood at the edge of the servants' entrance, my fingers twisted into the coarse fabric of my apron, watching the chaos unfold like a storm I couldn't escape. The castle's great dining room stretched before me, all vaulted ceilings and tapestries depicting wolves mid-hunt, their eyes seeming to track every movement. But no one was looking at the walls. Everyone was looking at her, Princess Neve. She stood in the center of the room, small for her 8 years, her white blonde hair wild around her flushed face. Her mouth was open, and though I couldn't hear the sound from where I stood, I could see the effect. Servants stumbling backward, the head housekeeper pressing her hands to her ears, even the guards at the door wincing. The child's fury was a physical force, her whole body trembling with it. I'd been at Thornmere Castle for 3 days. 3 days of keeping my head down, scrubbing floors that never seemed clean, learning the hierarchy of a household where everyone existed in the shadow of the king. 3 days of wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake leaving the quiet safety of the southern villages for this. My mother's voice echoed in my memory, though I wished it wouldn't. You have a gift, Iris. Not everyone can speak with their hands the way you do. Your father taught you for a reason. My father, who'd lost his hearing in a mining accident when I was 6, who'd invented his own language of gestures and expressions because the world wouldn't slow down for him, who'd taught me that silence wasn't emptiness. It was just another way of being full. But here, in this castle of wolves and power, what good was any of that? The princess screamed again. I could tell by the way her chest heaved, the way her small fists clenched at her sides. A ceramic plate shattered against the floor. The head housekeeper, Margot, a stern woman with iron-gray hair, turned to bark orders at the younger servants. I caught fragments. Useless. Cursed. The king will hear of this. No one approached the child. I should have stayed where I was. I was the newest, the lowest, invisible in my plain gray dress, with my pale hair tucked severely under my cap. But something in the princess's face stopped me. Not the anger, but what lay beneath it. I'd seen that look before, in my father's eyes during the first months after the accident. The desperate frustration of being trapped inside yourself, of having words that no one could understand. My feet moved before my mind could catch up. I crossed the dining hall, aware of every eye turning toward me, feeling the weight of their confusion and judgment. The princess saw me coming. Her blue eyes, so pale they were almost colorless, fixed on me with an intensity that would have stopped most people. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Her small body coiled like a spring about to snap. I knelt down, bringing myself to her level, close enough to see the tears tracking through the flush on her cheeks, close enough to smell the lavender soap they used in the royal quarters. The room had gone quiet in a different way now, the kind of silence that precedes either disaster or revelation. Slowly, carefully, I raised my hands. I touched my fingers to my chest. I then opened my palms upward in a gesture of openness, of receiving. I'm listening. The princess froze. For a long moment, she just stared at my hands, her expression cycling through confusion, suspicion, and something that might have been hope, but looked too fragile to name. Around us, I could feel the servants' shock, Margot's sharp intake of breath. But I kept my focus on Neve, on her eyes that were suddenly bright with more than just tears. She moved her hands hesitantly, clumsily, pointing to herself, then making a pushing motion, then pointing around the room with jerky, frustrated movements. It wasn't the same system my father and I had used, but I understood the essence. They don't understand me. They don't try. I nodded. Then I pointed to her, and touched my own eyes, then my heart. I see you. Something broke in her expression. The anger drained away like water through a crack, leaving behind exhaustion and relief so profound it hurt to witness. Her small shoulders sagged. She made a gesture I didn't understand, but the emotion behind it was clear. A question, desperate and vulnerable. Will you stay? Before I could respond, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The servants around us shifted, their attention snapping to the doorway. I felt it before I saw him, the change in air pressure, the way everyone suddenly stood straighter. Fear and respect mingling in their postures. King Kylam entered like winter itself. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to absorb light. His hair was black as pitch, longer than fashion dictated, pulled back from a face that looked carved from granite. But it was his eyes that stopped me, gray as storm clouds, scanning the room with an intelligence that missed nothing. Power radiated from him, the kind that wasn't just about physical strength, but something deeper, something primal that made my instincts scream to look away, to bow, to disappear. I stayed kneeling beside his daughter. His gaze found Neve first, sweeping over her with an expression I couldn't quite read, concern mixed with something darker, something like pain. Then his eyes moved to me, for a heartbeat. I forgot how to breathe. I'd heard the stories, of course, the Lycan king who'd lost his wife in childbirth, whose daughter had been born silent, who ruled with iron discipline because he'd already lost everything that mattered, who was more beast than man when the moon was full. Looking at him now, I believed every word. "What?" he said, his voice low and controlled, but carrying an edge that could cut. "Is happening here?" Margot rushed forward, her words tumbling out in a stream of explanations and excuses. The princess had been inconsolable, had destroyed property, had disrupted the entire household. No one could calm her. She was impossible, unmanageable. Perhaps she needed stronger discipline, perhaps... Enough. One word, and Margot fell silent. The king's attention hadn't left me. "You. Stand." I rose on shaking legs, acutely aware of how I must look. A common servant girl, plain-faced and unremarkable, with my hair escaping its cap and my apron stained from morning duties. The princess immediately moved closer to me, her small hand finding my skirt and gripping it tightly. The king's eyes tracked the movement. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. "Your name," he commanded. "Iris, Your Majesty." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I'm new to the household. I work in the kitchens." She was speaking to Neve with her hands. Margot interjected, her tone suggesting this was somehow scandalous, making gestures like some kind of signing. I interrupted, then immediately regretted my boldness. But the king's gaze sharpened with interest rather than anger. It's a way of communicating without sound, Your Majesty. My father was deaf. He taught me." The silence that followed felt endless. The princess's grip on my skirt tightened. King Kylam took a step closer, and I had to force myself not to retreat. Up close, he was even more intimidating. Taller than I'd realized, with hands that could easily span my throat, with an energy that made my skin prickle with awareness. "Show me," he said. My hands trembled as I demonstrated the basic signs. Simple concepts, emotions, needs. The princess watched intently, occasionally making her own clumsy attempts. The king watched us both, his expression unreadable, but I saw his jaw tighten when Neve successfully copied a sign for happy and looked up at him with pride shining in her pale eyes. "She understands you," he said. And for the first time, his voice held something other than command. It held wonder. And beneath that, an ache so deep, it made my chest hurt. "I think she's been trying to communicate all along, Your Majesty," I said quietly. "She just needed someone who knew how to listen." The king stared at me for a long moment, and I had the unsettling feeling he was seeing past my plain exterior into something deeper, weighing me against some internal measure I couldn't begin to guess. Finally, he turned to Margot. "Iris is relieved of kitchen duties. She's to stay with Princess Neve, teaching her this signing. Provide whatever she needs." Margot's face went through several shades of displeasure, but she bowed. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Your Majesty," I started to protest, suddenly terrified of this responsibility, of being thrust into proximity with royalty and power I didn't understand. His gaze cut back to me, and the words died in my throat. "My daughter hasn't been calm in anyone's presence for months. You will stay with her. That's not a request." Before I could respond, he turned and left the way he'd come, his departure somehow more dramatic than his arrival. The room seemed to expand in his absence, sounds returning gradually, whispers, the shuffle of feet, Margot's muttered complaints about the order of things being disrupted, but I barely noticed. I was looking down at Princess Neve, who was smiling for the first time since I'd seen her. A real smile, small and tentative, that transformed her entire face. She made a sign, uncertain, but clear enough. "Thank you." I smiled back, ignoring the weight of Margot's glare on my back, ignoring the uncertain future that stretched before me. For now, in this moment, I'd done something right. I'd reached across the silence and found someone on the other side. I didn't know yet how completely that single act would unravel and rebuild everything I thought I knew about courage, about love, about the space between being invisible and being seen. But I would learn. The weeks that followed blurred together like watercolors in rain, each day bleeding into the next with a rhythm I'd never experienced before. My tiny room in the servants' quarters, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, became a place I only visited to sleep. The rest of my time belonged to Neve. We started in the library, a vast room of leather and parchment, where afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting everything in amber. I'd never seen so many books in my life. In my village, we'd had perhaps a dozen volumes shared among all the families. Here, they lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines embossed with gold lettering I could barely read. Neve would sit cross-legged on the thick carpet, her white blonde hair catching the light, while I taught her the language my father had given me. At first, her movements were frustrated and clumsy, her small fingers stumbling over signs, her face crumpling when she couldn't make me understand. But she was clever, sharper than anyone had given her credit for. Within days, she could sign basic needs: hungry, tired, angry, scared. The scared one she used often. "Who frightens you?" I asked one afternoon, my hands moving slowly so she could follow. We'd been working for hours, and the autumn sun was beginning its descent, painting the library in shades of copper and rust. She hesitated, then pointed toward the window, toward the training grounds visible below, where the king's personal guard practiced with weapons that gleamed like captured starlight. I could see figures moving in formation, hear the distant clash of steel even through the thick glass. "Your father?" I asked gently. She shook her head violently, then made a series of signs I'd taught her for different. Change, monster. Her pale eyes were wide, and I understood then what the servants whispered about in the kitchens late at night. The transformation, the full moon, the beast that walked in the king's skin. I took her small hands in mine, waiting until she met my eyes. "He would never hurt you," I signed, though I had no way of knowing if this was true. "You're his daughter, his heart." She looked at me with such desperate hope that I felt the weight of my words, the responsibility of them. What did I know of Lycan kings and their nature? What right did I have to promise safety in a world where I was still learning the rules? But she needed to hear it, so I said it again, with my hands and my eyes, until some of the fear left her face. The king himself remained a distant figure, a shadow that passed through corridors, a voice giving commands from behind closed doors. I saw him rarely, and when I did, I felt his attention like a physical touch, his gray eyes tracking the way Neve stayed close to me, the way she'd started smiling more frequently. He never spoke to me directly again after that first day, but I felt his presence constantly, as if the castle itself was an extension of his awareness. 2 months into my new role, everything changed. It was late afternoon, the sky outside darkening with the threat of an early winter storm. Neve and I were in her rooms, a suite of chambers decorated in soft blues and silvers that somehow felt cold, despite the fire burning in the hearth. I was teaching her more complex concepts, abstract ideas like tomorrow and remember and dream. She signed something I didn't recognize, her movements hesitant. I asked her to repeat it, and this time I caught the essence. Mother. My hands stilled. We'd never discussed her mother, though I knew the queen had died bringing Neve into the world. It was another whispered story from the kitchens. The beautiful Queen Elena, beloved by her people, lost to blood and complication, while the midwives stood helpless. The king had nearly destroyed the castle in his grief. "What do you want to know?" I signed carefully. Neve's response was simple but devastating. Did she love me before she knew I was broken? The words, the signs, hit me like a physical blow. I dropped to my knees in front of her, taking her face gently in my hands so she had to look at me. "You are not broken," I signed emphatically, releasing her face to make the gestures sharp and clear. "Not broken. Different. Special. Perfect." Tears welled in her pale eyes. "Father thinks I'm broken. That's why he can't look at me. I wanted to deny it, but I'd seen the pain in the king's face when he watched his daughter. Not disgust. Never that. But something more complicated. Grief, perhaps. Guilt. The weight of being unable to fix something that wasn't actually broken in the first place. He loves you," I signed. "More than anything. Sometimes love hurts too much to show." She studied my face for a long moment, then signed, "How do you know?" I didn't. But I'd seen the way guards were posted outside her door at night, the way her meals were prepared by the most trusted kitchen staff, the way her clothes were made from the finest fabrics, the way the king's whole body tensed when she was nearby, as if he was holding himself back from reaching for her but didn't know how. Before I could answer, the door burst open. A guard stood in the doorway, his face flushed with exertion. "Miss Iris, you're needed in the king's study. Immediately." Fear shot through me, cold and sharp. Had I done something wrong? Overstepped some boundary I didn't know existed? I looked at Neve, saw my own fear reflected in her face. "I'll come back," I signed to her, hoping it was true. The walk to the king's study felt endless. The guard led me through parts of the castle I'd never seen, corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, rooms that smelled of old leather and older secrets. Finally, we stopped before a heavy oak door. The guard knocked once, then opened it, gesturing for me to enter. The study was smaller than I expected, more intimate. Bookshelves covered one wall, a massive desk dominated the center, and a fire crackled in a stone hearth. But it was the three men standing near the window who captured my attention. King Calum stood with his back partially to me, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his spine. Beside him were two other men, both powerful-looking, both watching me with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. "Iris," the king said without turning. My name in his deep voice sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. "These are two of my most trusted advisors. Lord Rowan, my general." He gestured to a man with silver threading his dark hair, scarred hands resting on a sword belt. "And Finn, my steward and oldest friend." The second man was younger, with warm brown eyes and a face that suggested he smiled more than the others did. "Your Majesty," I managed, dropping into an awkward curtsy. "We have a situation," King Calum said, finally turning to face me. The firelight cast shadows across his features, making him look carved from darkness. "In 3 days, the Northern Alliance arrives for negotiations. There will be a feast, meetings, displays of strength and unity. Neve must attend." My stomach dropped. I'd heard about the Northern Alliance, other Lycan territories, old allies, complicated politics I barely understood. "Your Majesty, I'm not sure. She hasn't appeared in public since her last episode." His jaw tightened. 6 months ago. It ended with property destroyed and several servants injured. The Northern Lords brought it up in their last correspondence, questioned the stability of my heir, the security of our line. "They're testing you," Finn added, his voice gentler than the king's, "seeing if they can find weakness." "My daughter is not weak," King Calum said, and the sudden fury in his voice made me take an involuntary step back. But it wasn't directed at me. It was the rage of a father who couldn't protect his child from the cruelty of perception, from the judgment of those who saw difference as deficiency. Lord Rowan stepped forward. "We need her stable, calm, presentable. Can you do that?" I looked between the three men, feeling the weight of their expectations, their desperation. "She's 8 years old," I said quietly. "She's not a performance." The silence that followed was dangerous. Lord Rowan's eyes narrowed. Finn looked alarmed. But King Calum studied me with that unreadable expression, the one that made me feel simultaneously exposed and invisible. "No," he agreed finally. She's not. She's a princess, my daughter. And she needs to be there, showing those northern wolves that this kingdom is strong, that its future is secure. He moved closer, and I forced myself to hold my ground. You've taught her to communicate. Now teach her to endure. She can endure, I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. She already has. Every day she wakes up in a world that doesn't understand her, she endures. What you're asking is for her to perform that endurance for strangers. Yes, King Calum said simply. That's exactly what I'm asking. I thought of Neve's small face, the trust in her eyes, the way she'd asked if she was broken. She'll need me with her. During the feast. Lord Rowan made a sound of protest. A servant at the high table? Impossible. Then make it possible, I said, addressing the king directly, ignoring the way my heart hammered against my ribs. If you want her calm, if you want her to feel safe enough to be in that room, I need to be there, where she can see me. The three men exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them, the kind that came from years of friendship and warfare. Finally, Finn smiled slightly. She's brave, this one. Or foolish. Both, probably, King Calum muttered, but I caught something in his expression. A flash of respect, maybe, or approval. Fine. You'll attend the feast. Margot will find appropriate clothing. You'll sit near Neve, close enough to help if needed. He stepped even closer. Close enough that I could smell pine and smoke and something wild. But understand this. If she loses control, if she causes a scene, the consequences will be severe, not just for her reputation, but for the kingdom's stability. These northern lords are looking for any excuse to question my leadership, to suggest the southern territories would be better under their protection. She won't lose control, I said, though I had no way of guaranteeing it. You sound very certain. I am. I met his eyes. Those storm-gray depths that seem to contain both threat and vulnerability, because she's not broken, she never was. She just needed someone to speak her language. Something shifted in his face, a crack in the granite, brief but unmistakable. For a moment, I saw past the king to the man beneath, the father who'd watched his daughter suffer and hadn't known how to help. The grief was so raw, so unexpected, that I almost looked away, but I didn't. I held his gaze, let him see that I understood, that I knew what it cost him to ask for help, to admit his own limitations. 3 days, he said finally, stepping back. Prepare her. I was dismissed. I turned toward the door, but his voice stopped me. Iris. I looked back. Thank you. The words sounded rusty, as if he didn't use them often, foreseeing what others couldn't. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and fled before he could see how his gratitude had shaken me far more than his commands ever could. The 3 days passed like a held breath. Tense, suspended, inevitable. I spent every waking moment with Neve, preparing her not just with signs and words, but with something deeper. Confidence. The belief that she belonged in that hall, at that table, in this world that had tried so hard to make her feel otherwise. We practiced in her rooms first, then in the empty dining hall early in the mornings when the servants were still lighting fires and the castle was draped in pre-dawn quiet. I taught her how to sit with her spine straight, how to use utensils with the deliberate grace of someone who knew they were being watched. But more importantly, I taught her how to breathe through discomfort, how to find me in a crowd, how to sign discreetly under the table if she needed to communicate. You are Princess Neve, daughter of King Calum, heir to Thornmere, I signed to her on the morning of the feast. You are brave. You are strong. You are enough. She repeated the signs back to me, her small fingers growing more confident with each gesture. Then she added something new, something we'd been working on. You stay with me? Every moment, I promised. Margot had delivered a dress to my quarters the night before, a simple gown in deep forest green, far finer than anything I'd ever worn, but still modest enough to mark me as subordinate. When I put it on, the fabric whispered against my skin, foreign and uncomfortable. I'd never been someone who drew attention, never wanted to be. But tonight, I would be visible in a way that terrified me. The feast hall had been transformed. Long tables stretched the length of the room, laden with silver platters and crystal goblets that caught the light from hundreds of candles. Tapestries had been changed to display the kingdom's crest, a wolf rampant against a moon. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, spiced wine, and the underlying musk of Lycans in close quarters. I'd never seen so many of them in one place. The Northern Alliance had arrived that afternoon, a dozen lords and their entourages, all of them radiating the same primal energy that emanated from King Calum, but somehow lesser, like stars compared to the sun. They watched everything with sharp eyes, assessing, judging, looking for weakness. I stood near the entrance to the royal chambers, waiting for Neve. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, so I twisted them in my skirt, trying to steady my breathing. Finn appeared beside me, dressed in formal attire that made him look older, more severe. "She'll be fine," he said quietly, though I wasn't sure if he was reassuring me or himself. "The king has guards positioned throughout the hall. At the first sign of trouble." "There won't be trouble," I interrupted, then immediately softened my tone. "She's ready." He studied me with those warm brown eyes, and I saw something like sympathy there. "You care for her. Really care for her." "She's easy to care for," I said. "When you take the time to know her. The king sees that. What you've done. It hasn't gone unnoticed." Before I could respond, the doors opened, and Neve emerged. She looked ethereal in a gown of pale blue silk, her white blonde hair braided with silver thread, a small circlet resting on her head. But it was her face that stopped me, the determination there, the fear she was choosing to face rather than flee from. She saw me and immediately moved to my side, her small hand finding mine. I squeezed gently, then signed, "Ready?" She nodded, though her grip tightened. King Calum appeared behind her, and I felt the air change. He wore black, as always, but tonight there were subtle additions: a heavy chain of office, rings that glinted on his fingers, his dark hair pulled back to reveal the sharp planes of his face. He looked every inch the warrior king, powerful and untouchable. But when his eyes found his daughter, something softened. "Neve," he said, his deep voice gentle in a way I'd never heard. She couldn't hear him, but she saw his lips move, saw the expression on his face. She released my hand long enough to sign something simple. "I try. For you." I saw him freeze, saw the recognition flash across his features. "You taught her that," he said to me. Not quite a question. "She wanted to tell you herself." He looked between us, and for a moment, the king's mask slipped entirely. There was grief there, yes, but also hope. Fragile and uncertain, like the first green shoots after winter. "Tell her..." He stopped, his jaw working. "Tell her I'm proud of her," I translated, and Neve's face transformed. She signed back, and I spoke the words aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. "She says she'll make you proud tonight." King Calum knelt down, bringing himself to his daughter's level for the first time since I'd known him. He reached out slowly, carefully, and touched her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible from hands that large, that powerful. Neve leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. They stayed like that for a heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, a moment suspended outside of time. Then he stood, the mask sliding back into place, and gestured toward the doors. "It's time." The feast hall fell silent when we entered. Every head turned, every conversation died mid-word. The king walked ahead, his presence commanding the space, but all eyes eventually tracked to Neve walking beside him, and to me, just a step behind, close enough to matter. I could feel their judgment, their curiosity, their skepticism. A child who couldn't hear, couldn't speak in the traditional sense. A common servant girl at a royal feast. It went against every protocol, every tradition. But the king's hand rested briefly on Neve's shoulder as he guided her to her seat at the high table, and that simple gesture silenced any potential protests. I was positioned to Neve's left, close enough that she could see my hands, far enough that I wouldn't intrude on the royal presence. Across the table sat Lord Rowan and several of the northern lords, Gray-haired men with predatory eyes and carefully neutral expressions. The eldest among them, a man with a scar running from temple to jaw, raised his goblet. King Calum, we are honored to join you this evening and to finally meet your daughter, the Princess Neve. His eyes settled on her with unsettling intensity. We've heard stories. I'm sure you have, Lord Garrett. King Calum replied, his voice smooth but edged with warning. My daughter is full of surprises. Garrett smiled, showing too many teeth. Indeed. Tell me, Princess, do you enjoy living in Thornmere? The silence that followed was deadly. Everyone at the table knew she couldn't answer, not in the way they expected. I saw the trap being laid, make the child uncomfortable, expose her differences, question whether she was fit to eventually rule. But Neve didn't panic. She looked at me, and I signed the question. Then she turned to her father and made a series of gestures, clear, deliberate, graceful. I spoke them aloud, my voice carrying across the suddenly attentive hall. She says Thornmere is home, the mountains protect us, the people are strong. She's proud to be daughter of this land. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Garrett's smile faltered. And who speaks for the princess? Some servant girl? Iris is my daughter's companion and translator, King Calum said. And though his tone remained even, I felt the threat beneath it. She has my complete trust. How convenient, another northern lord interjected, younger than Garrett but with the same calculating eyes. A translator who speaks whatever the king wishes to hear. Before anyone could respond, Neve moved. She pushed back from the table slightly and began to sign, not to me, but to everyone. Her hands moving in the candlelight with confidence and precision. She signed for perhaps a minute, her pale eyes fierce, her small chin lifted. The hall was silent. Every eye was on her. And when she finished, she looked at me expectantly. My throat was tight, but I forced the words out clearly. She says, I cannot hear your voices, but I see your faces. I see doubt. I see those who think I am weak because I am different. My father taught me that a true leader doesn't need the loudest voice. They need the clearest vision. I may be young and I may be silent, but I see everything, and I will remember who stood with my father and who questioned him when he needed unity most. The silence stretched. Then, from somewhere down the table, someone began to clap. Slow, measured applause. Finn. It was picked up by others, spreading through the hall until even some of the northern lords were joining in, though their expressions ranged from impressed to irritated. King Calum looked at his daughter with undisguised pride, and I saw several lords marking that expression, recalculating their strategies. Garrett recovered first, raising his goblet again. The princess has spirit, just like her father. It could have been a compliment or a veiled insult, but the moment had shifted. The feast continued, and I began to breathe again. But as the evening wore on, as wine flowed and conversations grew louder, I noticed things. The way Lord Garrett's eyes kept returning to Neve, assessing. The way he leaned close to his companions, whispering. The way his hand never strayed far from the knife at his belt. Something was wrong. I touched Neve's arm gently, waited until she looked at me. Are you well? I signed. She nodded, but I saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her small shoulders had begun to sag. She'd been performing for hours, being watched and judged and tested. She signed something quick. Tired? Want to leave? I glanced at King Calum, caught his eye. He read the situation immediately and stood, drawing all attention to himself. Lords and ladies, my daughter has honored you with her presence, but she's still a child who needs rest. Princess Neve will retire for the evening. Neve stood gracefully, signed a formal farewell that I translated, then began to move toward the exit. I rose to follow, but King Calum's hand on my arm stopped me. Stay with her, he said quietly, for my ears only. Don't leave her side. Not tonight. There was something in his voice that sent ice through my veins. Your Majesty? Rowan will escort you both. Trust him as you trust me. Before I could ask more, Lord Rowan appeared, his scarred hand resting casually on his sword hilt. This way, ladies. We left the feast hall, Neve between us, walking through corridors that seemed darker than usual despite the torches. The sounds of the feast faded behind us, replaced by our footsteps and the distant howl of wind against stone. We were halfway to Neve's chambers when I heard it. Footsteps behind us, moving too quickly, too deliberately. Rowan heard it too. His hand tightened on his sword, and he moved to place himself between us and whatever was coming. 3 figures emerged from the shadows. Northern guards, their faces hard, their intentions unclear, but their presence all wrong. Lord Garrett sends his compliments, one of them said, his accent thick. He wishes to speak with the princess, privately. The princess is retiring, Rowan replied, his voice like gravel. Any requests should go through the king. The king is occupied. This will only take a moment. They moved forward, and I didn't think. I acted. I scooped Neve into my arms, felt her small body tense with fear, and stepped back. Rowan's sword cleared its sheath with a sound like lightning, and suddenly the corridor was a battlefield. The clash of steel rang out, echoing off stone. Rowan moved like violence given form, his blade a silver arc in the torchlight. But there were 3 of them, and they were trained, and I realized with sickening clarity that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an attempt on Neve's life, on the heir to Thornmere. "Run!" Rowan growled without taking his eyes from his opponents. "Get her to safety, now!" I ran. Neve clung to me, her face buried in my shoulder, as I sprinted through corridors I barely knew. Behind us, I heard more footsteps, more voices, the sounds of pursuit. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might break free from my chest. The castle had become a maze, and I was lost in it, carrying the most precious thing in the kingdom, while enemies closed in from every direction. I turned a corner and nearly collided with a figure in black, King Calum. He took in the scene instantly, my terror, Neve in my arms, the sounds of combat echoing from behind us. His face transformed into something inhuman, something that made my instincts scream to flee. "Who?" he growled, and the word held more beast than man. "Northern guards," I gasped. "They tried to take her. Lord Rowan is—" I didn't need to finish. He was already moving past us, his stride powerful and purposeful, and I heard the change in his breathing, saw his hands beginning to shift. The wolf was rising, and anyone who stood in his path would not survive. Finn appeared from another corridor, his face pale but determined. "This way. The king's chambers. No one gets through those doors." We ran again, but this time with protection, with direction. Finn led us through passages I'd never seen, using keys I didn't know existed, until finally we burst into a suite of rooms that could only belong to the king. All dark wood and leather, weapons mounted on walls, a massive bed that looked like it could sleep 4. "Lock it," Finn ordered, throwing the bolt himself. "Don't open it for anyone but me or the king." Then he was gone, and Neve and I were alone in the sudden, suffocating silence. I set her down carefully, my arms shaking from exertion and fear. She was crying soundlessly, her small body racked with sobs I couldn't hear but could feel. I pulled her close, held her tight, and let her fear and mine tangle together in the darkness. Outside, in the castle's corridors and halls, I heard roars that could only be partially human, heard screams that ended too abruptly, heard the sound of a kingdom defending its heir with tooth and claw. And I held Neve through all of it, signing promises I wasn't sure I could keep, until the sounds finally faded, and the silence became something that might have been peace, or might have been the calm before worse storms. Dawn came slowly, painting the king's chambers in shades of gray and gold. I hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, too aware of every sound beyond the locked door, too focused on keeping Neve calm through the longest night of our lives. She'd finally dozed off near sunrise, curled against me on the massive bed, her breathing soft and steady despite the tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. I sat watching her, my own exhaustion a heavy weight in my bones when I heard it. The sound of a key in the lock, the door opening with careful quietness. Every muscle in my body tensed, ready to fight or flee or simply put myself between Neve and whatever came through that door. But it was King Calum who entered, and the sight of him stole my breath. He was covered in blood, not his own, I realized, but splattered across his clothes and skin like crimson paint. His shirt was torn, his hair loose and wild around his face, his hands still bearing traces of claws that were slowly receding back to human fingers. But it was his eyes that captured me, still more wolf than man, burning with an intensity that should have terrified me, but somehow didn't. He stopped when he saw us, his chest rising and falling with breaths that were almost steady. "Is she hurt?" His voice was rough, scraped raw. "No," I whispered. Frightened, exhausted, but not hurt. Lord Rowan got us away in time. Something in his expression cracked, relief so profound it seemed to physically pain him. He moved closer, each step careful, controlled, as if he didn't trust himself yet. When he reached the bed, he knelt beside it, bringing himself level with his sleeping daughter. For a long moment, he just watched her. I saw his hand reach out, trembling slightly, then pull back. Afraid to touch her, afraid he might still have too much beast in him, might hurt her without meaning to. "She's safe with you," I said softly. "She knows that." His eyes lifted to mine, and I saw exhaustion there to match my own, but also something else, a question, a vulnerability he'd never shown before. "How did you know?" "To run to my chambers. Finn brought us. He said these doors were the only ones that would hold. Finn is wise." He stood slowly, moved to a wash basin near the window. I watched as he cleaned the blood from his hands with methodical precision, his movements practiced. How many times had he done this? How many threats had he faced? How many enemies had he torn apart to keep this kingdom, this daughter, safe? "What happened?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Lord Garrett orchestrated an attempt on Neve's life. His voice was flat, emotionless, but I heard the rage beneath it, controlled now, but still burning. He believed that with her gone, the Northern Territories could claim instability, push for a regency council, ultimately absorb Thornmere into their alliance. My stomach turned. But she's a child. She's an heir. In their eyes, that makes her a political obstacle. He dried his hands, turned to face me fully. "Garrett and his conspirators are dead. The others in the Northern Alliance have sworn they knew nothing of the plot, and Rowan believes them. They've left Thornmere at first light, their alliance broken, their honor questioned." He paused. "My daughter is safe because of you. I didn't do anything. I just ran. You protected her when warriors tried to take her. You kept her calm through a night that would have broken most adults. You did exactly what needed to be done." He moved closer again, and I realized how small the space felt with him in it, how his presence seemed to fill every corner. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You don't owe me anything," I said, uncomfortable with his gratitude, with the way he was looking at me like I was something more than a servant, something that mattered. "I care for her. That's all. That's everything." He was close enough now that I could smell pine and smoke and copper. "Most people at this court see her as a burden, a weakness, a problem to be managed. You see her as a person, as someone worth knowing." I didn't know what to say to that, so I looked down at Neve, still sleeping peacefully despite everything. She makes it easy. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like understanding, like two people who'd survived something together and were still processing what that meant. "I need to ask something of you," he said finally. "Something beyond your current duties." Wariness crept up my spine. "What is it?" "Remain as Neve's companion, but also teach me. The signing. The way you communicate with her." He looked away, and I saw shame flicker across his features. "I'm her father, and I can't speak to my own daughter, can't tell her I love her, can't ask about her day, can't—" He stopped, his jaw tight. "I want to know her, really know her, and I need your help to do that." The request surprised me more than anything else that had happened. King Calum, asking for help, admitting vulnerability, wanting to learn from a common servant girl because she had something he needed more than power, or wealth, or control. "Of course," I said. "I'll teach you everything I know." Relief softened his features, made him look younger somehow. "Thank you." He glanced at the window, where full morning light was streaming through. Rest here today, both of you. The castle is secure, but I want you somewhere I know is safe. I'll have food sent up." He turned to leave, but I stopped him with a question I'd been holding since the night began. "Your Majesty, when you transformed last night, was it difficult to come back?" He looked at me over his shoulder, and I saw the honesty in his eyes. "It's always difficult, but last night, knowing she was in danger, knowing someone had tried to hurt her." He paused. The wolf wanted blood, wanted to hunt every threat, tear apart anyone who might harm her. Coming back meant letting some of them live, meant trusting others to handle justice instead of taking it myself. His hands flexed, and I saw claws threaten to emerge again before he forced them back. "I'm not entirely sure I succeeded. But you did come back," I said. "That's what matters." Something shifted in his expression. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition. Then he left, closing the door quietly behind him. And I was alone with Neve, and the aftermath of violence I'd barely survived. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Neve and I remained in the king's chambers for 2 more nights, while the castle was cleaned, while order was restored, while servants whispered about the bloodstains that couldn't be fully scrubbed from stone floors. When we finally returned to her rooms, they felt different, safer somehow, with guards posted openly now, with everyone aware of how precious she was, how protected. But the biggest change was King Calum. He came to Neve's chambers every evening after his council meetings, still dressed in the formal attire of leadership, and sat with us for an hour. At first, his hands were clumsy, his frustration evident, as he struggled with signs that Neve had mastered weeks ago. But he persisted, practicing the same gestures over and over until they became smooth, natural. I watched father and daughter slowly learn to speak to each other, and it was like watching ice melt after a long winter. Neve's face would light up when he signed something correctly. He'd smile, actually smile, when she taught him a new word. They started with simple things. "How are you?" "I'm well." "What did you learn today?" But gradually the conversations deepened. He told her stories of her mother, using signs and my voice to translate. And Neve learned that Elena had been fierce and kind, and had wanted her daughter more than anything. Neve told him about her fears, her dreams, the way the world felt when everyone looked at you but no one really saw you. One evening, about a month after the attempt on her life, Neve signed something that made King Calum go very still. I translated hesitantly. "She wants to know if you were ever afraid that she wouldn't love you back, because you waited so long to try to speak with her." He looked at his daughter for a long moment, and I saw the careful mask he wore for the world slip away entirely. "Every day," he signed, his movements slow but clear. "I was afraid you'd see me as the father who failed you, who didn't know how to reach you when you needed him most." Neve reached out and took his large hand in her small ones, then signed with her free hand. "You're here now. That's what matters." I had to look away as tears blurred my vision. The king cleared his throat roughly, then signed, "Your mother would be proud of you. I am proud of you." That night, after he'd left, and I was settling Neve into bed, she signed something to me. "Thank you for bringing him back to me." "You brought him back," I corrected. "Just by being yourself." She smiled, then added, "He looks at you differently now. Have you noticed?" I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "He looks at everyone differently. The attack changed things." She gave me the kind of knowing look that shouldn't exist on an 8-year-old's face, then snuggled into her pillows and closed her eyes. But she was right, I realized later, as I lay in my own bed, staring at the ceiling. Something had shifted between King Calum and me. It started with gratitude, with shared purpose, but it had grown into something I couldn't quite name. I'd catch him watching me during lessons, not with the distant observation of a king assessing a servant, but with genuine curiosity, as if he was trying to understand who I was beneath the plain exterior and quiet demeanor. It terrified me. Winter deepened, bringing snow that covered the castle grounds in pristine white. Neve loved it, insisted on going outside despite the cold. King Calum joined us one afternoon, and I watched him teach his daughter to make snow sculptures, his large hands guiding her smaller ones with infinite patience. She laughed, really laughed, and the sound I couldn't hear but could see in her face made something in my chest ache with joy. You're good for them both, a voice said beside me. Finn had appeared, wrapped in a heavy cloak, his breath misting in the cold air. I've known Calum for 20 years. I've never seen him like this. At peace with himself. He's just learning to be a father, I said. No. Finn's voice was gentle but firm. He's learning to be human again. There's a difference. He paused, watching the king and princess play in the snow. After Elena died, he buried himself in duty, in control, in the role of king. He forgot how to be anything else. But you remind him. I don't remind him of anything. I'm nobody. You're somebody who sees people for who they are, not what they represent. That's rarer than you think. He turned to me, his expression serious. Be careful, Iris. The court will notice soon if they haven't already. A king showing favor to a common servant girl. It causes talk. There's no favor, I protested, even as doubt crept in. He's just grateful that Neve has someone who understands her. Finn smiled sadly. If you believe that, you're less observant than I thought. He walked away, leaving me with questions I didn't want to ask and answers I was afraid to find. That evening, after Neve was asleep and I was preparing to return to my quarters, King Calum asked to speak with me privately. We stood in the corridor outside Neve's chambers, torchlight casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. I've been thinking, he said, his voice low, about the future, about what's best for Neve. My heart sank. This was it. He was going to tell me my services were no longer needed, that I'd taught him enough, that Neve would be fine without me now. She'll need tutors soon, he continued. Real education, not just the basics. Languages, history, politics, strategy. Everything an heir needs to know. I nodded, throat tight. Of course, she's clever. She'll excel. I want you to oversee her education, not as a servant, but as her official governess, with a title, chambers in the family wing, a salary befitting the position. He paused, watching my face. You'd be part of the household, permanently. I stared at him, trying to process the words. Your Majesty, I'm not qualified. You're the only person who's ever truly seen her. That makes you more qualified than anyone. He stepped closer, and I became acutely aware that we were alone in this corridor, that his presence made the air feel charged with something electric. I'm not asking you to leave her. I'm asking you to stay, for as long as you're willing. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Why does it matter what I want? His gray eyes held mine, and for a moment, I saw past the king to the man, lonely, damaged, reaching for something he couldn't quite name. Because somewhere between teaching me to speak with my daughter and protecting her with your life, you became someone whose presence I can't imagine this castle without. The admission hung between us, dangerous and honest. I should have stepped back, should have reminded him of the distance that was supposed to exist between us. Instead, I heard myself say, "Then I'll stay." Relief flooded his features, followed by something warmer, something that made my pulse quicken. Good, he said softly. That's good. We stood there for another heartbeat, the space between us charged with possibilities neither of us was ready to voice. Then he stepped back, the king's mask sliding into place, and wished me good night. I walked back to my quarters in a daze, Finn's warning echoing in my mind. The court would notice. People would talk. A common girl rising to a position of importance, spending hours alone with the king and his daughter. But as I lay in bed that night, I found I didn't care about the talk. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere, like I mattered to people who mattered to me. Whatever came next, gossip, judgment, complications I couldn't yet foresee, I would face it, because I'd made a promise to stay, and I intended to keep it. Spring came to Thornmere like a whispered promise, melting snow revealing green beneath, coaxing wildflowers from the earth. I'd been living in the family wing for 3 months now, my new chambers a suite of rooms I still couldn't quite believe were mine. A sitting area with books I was slowly learning to read better, a bedroom with windows overlooking the gardens. Space that felt both luxurious and lonely. Neve thrived under her new routine. Tutors came and went, teaching her mathematics through visual problems, history through illustrated texts, geography through maps she could touch and explore. But I remained her constant, translating when needed, advocating when tutors grew frustrated, celebrating every small victory. She was brilliant, I realized, her mind sharp and quick, hindered only by others' inability to communicate effectively. But it was my evolving relationship with King Calum that consumed my thoughts during quiet moments. He'd taken to joining us for morning lessons, learning alongside his daughter, his presence both comforting and unsettling. I'd catch him watching me explain a concept, his gray eyes thoughtful, and feel heat creep up my neck. Sometimes our hands would brush when reaching for the same book, and the contact felt electric, significant in ways I didn't want to examine too closely. The court had indeed noticed. Whispers followed me through corridors. Speculation about the common girl who'd risen so far, so fast. Some servants treated me with new deference that felt unearned. Others looked at me with barely concealed resentment. Margot, in particular, made her disapproval known through tight-lipped silences and pointed comments about people forgetting their place. I tried to ignore it all, focusing on Neve, on my duties, on anything except the growing awareness that my feelings for King Calum had shifted into dangerous territory. The realization hit me fully one afternoon in late spring. We were in the library, the three of us, sunlight streaming through windows and dust motes dancing in the air like tiny stars. Neve was absorbed in a book about ancient kingdoms, her finger tracing text she was learning to decipher. King Calum sat across from me, reading reports, but occasionally glancing up to watch his daughter with undisguised affection. "She's happy," he signed to me, the gesture smooth now after months of practice. I never thought I'd see her like this. "She always had happiness in her," I signed back. "She just needed permission to show it." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger, less burdened. "You have a gift for finding light in people." Before I could respond, Neve looked up and signed, "Can we go to the gardens? The roses are blooming." "Of course," King Calum signed. "I'll join you." We walked through the castle together, an unlikely trio that had somehow become natural. Guards nodded as we passed, servants stepped aside, and I tried not to think about how this looked. The king, his daughter, and me, moving through his domain like a family. The gardens were spectacular, explosion of color and scent that made Neve's face light up with joy. She ran ahead to examine a particularly vibrant cluster of roses, leaving her father and me walking more slowly behind. "Iris," he said, and the sound of my name in his deep voice always made something flutter in my chest. "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done, for Neve, for me, for," he paused, seeming to struggle with words, "for making this place feel like a home again instead of just a castle." "You don't need to thank me," I said, keeping my eyes on Neve to avoid meeting his gaze. "I'm just doing what anyone would know." His hand caught my arm gently, stopping me. I looked up at him, and the intensity in his eyes stole my breath. "Not anyone. You. Specifically you." He released me quickly, as if realizing the impropriety, but the damage was done. I could still feel the warmth of his touch, the way my skin tingled where his fingers had been. "Your Majesty." "Calum," he interrupted. "When we're alone like this, just use my name." It felt transgressive, dangerous, but also inevitable. "Calum," I said softly, testing the weight of it. "I think you should know. People are talking. Let them talk. It's not that simple. I'm a servant. You're the king. There are expectations, protocols. I don't care." The fierceness in his voice surprised me. I've spent years living by everyone else's expectations, doing what was proper, what was expected, and all it got me was loneliness and a daughter I couldn't speak to. He moved closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "You changed that. You walked into my life and reminded me that connection matters more than propriety. That being seen matters more than being powerful." "Calum," I didn't know what to say, how to respond to the rawness in his admission. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know the position I'm putting you in, the complications. I needed you to know that you matter, To me. Not as a servant, not as Neve's governess, but as Papa. Neve's voice, the first time I'd ever heard her make a deliberate sound, wordless but clear, cut through the moment. We both turned to see her signing frantically, pointing toward the garden entrance. A woman stood there, elegant and poised in traveling clothes, her dark hair swept up in an elaborate style. She was beautiful, with sharp features and calculating eyes that swept over the scene before her. The king and I standing too close, the obvious intimacy of the moment she'd interrupted. "Lady Sienna," Calum said, his voice cooling instantly, distance reasserting itself. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow. Clearly." Her smile was polite but didn't reach her eyes. She glided forward, her attention settling on me with the precision of a blade. "And who is this?" "Iris, my daughter's governess and companion. Iris, this is Lady Sienna Ashford from the Western Territories. We have business to discuss." The way he said it made my stomach knot. This wasn't casual business. This was political, personal, complicated in ways I suddenly didn't want to understand. "How charming," Lady Sienna said, her tone suggesting she found it anything but. "Teaching the poor dear to communicate. How noble of you." I felt Neve tense beside me, saw her small hands curl into fists, but I kept my voice level. Princess Neve doesn't need teaching to communicate. She just needs people willing to listen. Lady Sienna's eyebrows rose. How passionate. "Calum, darling, perhaps we should discuss our arrangements. I've traveled a long way." The casual endearment made my chest tighten. Calum's jaw worked, but he nodded. "Of course. Iris, please take Neve inside. I'll join you both later for lessons." I wanted to protest, to demand explanations I had no right to ask for. Instead, I nodded, took Neve's hand, and led her back toward the castle. Behind us, I heard Lady Sienna's musical laugh, heard Calum's low response, and felt something crack inside my chest. "Who is she?" Neve signed once we were out of earshot. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think we're about to find out." The answer came that evening at dinner. The court had been assembled in the Great Hall, rumors already spreading about Lady Sienna's arrival. I sat at a lower table with other household staff, close enough to see the high table, but far enough to feel the distance acutely. Lady Sienna sat beside King Calum, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, speaking to him with the easy familiarity of someone who knew him well. Neve sat on his other side, her small face troubled, her eyes seeking mine across the crowded room. I signed reassurance to her, though I felt anything but reassured myself. Lord Rowan stood to make an announcement. "Lords and ladies, honored guests, King Calum has asked me to share news that will strengthen our kingdom and secure our future. Lady Sienna Ashford of the Western Territories has accepted the king's proposal of marriage. They will be wed at the summer solstice." The hall erupted in applause and congratulations. I felt the world tilt, felt my carefully constructed sense of belonging shatter like dropped glass. Of course. Of course he was getting married. He was a king. He needed a queen. He needed political alliances and heirs, and all the things a common servant girl could never provide. I looked at Neve and saw my own devastation reflected in her pale eyes. She signed frantically. No, I don't want her. I want—" She stopped. But I knew what she was going to sign. "I want you." Across the room, Calum's eyes found mine. I saw apology there, and pain, and resignation. This was duty. This was what kings did. What we'd had, whatever it was, had been a momentary dream, beautiful, but impossible. I stood abruptly, ignoring the curious glances, and fled the hall. I made it to my chambers before the tears came, great heaving sobs that I muffled against my pillow. Foolish. I'd been so foolish to think I could matter to someone like him, to think that connection and understanding could bridge the impossible distance between us. A knock at my door interrupted my breakdown. I wiped my face hastily, expecting a servant. Instead, Calum stood there, still dressed in his formal attire, his expression tortured. "Let me explain," he said. "You don't owe me an explanation. You're the king. You have duties. Stop." He entered without invitation, closing the door behind him. "Yes, I'm the king, and yes, I have duties. The Western territories have been threatening to withdraw support unless I secure the alliance through marriage. Without them, Thornmere is vulnerable, isolated. I have to think of Neve's future, of the kingdom's stability. I understand, I said, though each word felt like swallowing glass. Truly I do. You're doing what you must. But I don't love her. The admission hung between us, raw and honest. I barely know her. She's politically advantageous, from the right family, approved by the council. Everything a queen should be. Then marry her, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Do your duty. And what about what I want? The anguish in his voice broke something in me. What about the fact that for the first time in 8 years, I felt alive again, that someone looked at me and saw past the crown, past the beast, past everything, and made me remember what it felt like to be human? Calum, please don't. I love you. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would change everything. I love the way you see people, the way you fought for my daughter, the way you're brave enough to challenge me, and gentle enough to heal wounds I didn't know I had. I love you. And I have to marry someone else, and it's destroying me. I stared at him, tears streaming down my face, unable to speak around the emotions choking me, because I loved him too, had loved him maybe from that first moment in the dining hall when he looked at his daughter with such desperate hope. But love wasn't enough. It had never been enough. You have to marry her, I whispered. For Neve, for the kingdom, for all the people who depend on you. I know. His voice broke. But I needed you to know that if I could choose, if I were just a man instead of a king, I would choose you. Every time, without hesitation. He left before I could respond, and I collapsed onto my bed, grieving for a future that had never really been possible, for a love that was real, but not enough to overcome the weight of crowns and kingdoms. The next weeks passed in a haze of pain. I continued teaching Neve, but Lady Sienna's presence poisoned everything. She was always there, always watching, making subtle comments about propriety and appropriate boundaries. She treated Neve with polite disdain, made no effort to learn signing, suggested that perhaps the princess would benefit from a more structured education at a boarding school. Kellum grew distant, his expression constantly strained. He still came to lessons, but the easy warmth between us had frozen into professional courtesy that hurt more than anger would have. Neve grew increasingly distressed. She stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping well, started having episodes again, not the violent screaming of before, but a quiet withdrawal that was somehow worse. She'd sign to me late at night, make her leave. Please make her leave. But I couldn't. No one could. The summer solstice approached with terrible inevitability. Wedding preparations consumed the castle. Flowers being arranged, guests arriving, everything building toward the moment when Calum would marry a woman he didn't love, and I would have to watch it happen. 3 days before the wedding, everything changed. I was with Neve in her chambers, trying to coax her to eat something, when Lady Sienna entered without knocking. Her expression was cold, calculated. "I think it's time we had a conversation," she said, "about your future here." I straightened, keeping Neve behind me protectively. "I'm Princess Neve's governess. My position was granted by the king. And soon I'll be queen, with the authority to revoke such appointments." She moved closer, her smile sharp. "Don't think I haven't noticed the way you look at him, the way he looks at you. It's inappropriate, unseemly, and it ends now. I've done nothing inappropriate. You exist inappropriately." Her mask slipped, revealing genuine malice beneath the polish. A common girl with pretensions above her station, making the king forget his duties, making his daughter dependent on you instead of learning proper behavior. You're a disruption, a complication. And once I'm queen, you'll be removed from this castle permanently. Neve pushed past me, signing furiously. Lady Sienna laughed. "Look at her, making her little hand gestures. That's what you've taught her, to be even more of a spectacle than she already is. A proper governess would have taught her dignity, acceptance of her limitations." The words were designed to wound, and they succeeded. I saw Neve's face crumple, saw the progress we'd made start to unravel. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Now, you can't order me. She said leave. Calum stood in the doorway, and the fury emanating from him was palpable. Now. Lady Sienna's eyes widened. Calum, I was just trying to establish boundaries. By attacking my daughter? By threatening someone under my protection? He moved into the room, and I saw his hands trembling with the effort of controlling his transformation. Get out of my sight before I forget you're a guest. She fled, her composure shattered. Calum looked at Neve, who immediately ran to him, burying her face against his chest. He held her tightly, signing apologies over her head while meeting my eyes. I can't do this, he said. I can't marry someone who would hurt her like that, who sees her as defective instead of extraordinary. You have to, I said miserably. The alliance... There are other alliances, other ways to secure the Western territories. He pulled back enough to look at Neve. Signed, I'm sorry. I was trying to do what was right for the kingdom, but I forgot to do what was right for us, for you. Neve signed back. Don't marry her, please. I won't, he promised. Then his eyes found mine. I won't marry someone I don't love when the person I do love is standing right here. My heart stuttered. Calum, we discussed this. I'm not royal, highborn, politically advantageous, he smiled sadly. No, you're not. But you're brave, compassionate, strong. You protected my daughter with your life. You taught me to speak to her, to see her, to be a father instead of just a king. You make me want to be better than I am. He moved closer, still holding Neve. The council will object. The court will gossip. Some territories may withdraw support. But I've realized something. If I sacrifice my daughter's happiness and my own for political advantage, what kind of kingdom am I building? What kind of man am I? You're asking me to be queen, I whispered, barely believing it. I'm asking you to be my wife. To be Neve's mother in truth. To stand beside me not because of bloodlines or alliances, but because we choose each other. He paused. If you want that. If I haven't ruined everything with my cowardice these past weeks. I looked at Neve, who was signing frantically. Say yes. Please say yes. I looked at Calum, this complicated man who'd learned to love again despite his grief, who'd chosen vulnerability over control. I thought about my father, who'd taught me that different wasn't broken, that silence was just another language waiting to be learned. About my mother, who'd told me I had a gift for seeing people. About the journey that had brought me from a southern village to this impossible moment. Yes, I said, and felt the future rearrange itself around that single word. The wedding that took place at summer solstice wasn't the grand political affair that had been planned. Lady Sienna had departed in fury, taking her Western allies with her, but Lord Rowan had negotiated new agreements, found different paths to security. Some territories withdrew support, but others, hearing the story of the king who'd chosen love over advantage, pledged themselves more firmly. I stood in a simple gown of ivory silk, my pale hair woven with wildflowers from the garden, holding hands with a man who'd been powerful enough to command armies, but brave enough to be vulnerable. Neve stood beside us, her role adjusted from witness to participant, signing vows of family that we all repeated. I choose you, Calum signed and spoke aloud. Your courage, your compassion, your extraordinary heart. Not because of duty, but because I love you. I choose you. I signed and whispered. Your strength, your devotion, your capacity to grow. Not because of your crown, but because I love you. And Neve signed. I choose both of you. My family. The kingdom adjusted. Some never accepted me, a common girl who'd risen too far, too fast. But others saw what Calum saw. That love and understanding built stronger foundations than political marriages ever could. That a queen who'd been a servant understood her people in ways nobility never would. Years passed. Neve grew into a remarkable young woman, fluent in multiple languages, both spoken and signed. She became an advocate for those who communicated differently, building schools and training teachers, using her position to create the understanding she'd once been denied. She was adored by the people, respected by the council, and never once doubted her worth again. Calum and I had 2 more children. A son with his father's gray eyes and my gentle disposition. A daughter with white blonde hair, who could hear perfectly, but insisted on learning signing anyway. Our family was unconventional, built on foundation of acceptance and chosen love, rather than bloodlines and duty. On quiet nights, when the children were asleep and the castle was still, Caleb and I would stand in the garden where he'd first told me he loved me. He'd pull me close, and I'd rest my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked once, choosing me over the politically advantageous match. He tilted my face up to his gray eyes soft in the moonlight. "Every single day," he said, and my heart stuttered before he smiled. "I regret that I almost let you go, that I wasted weeks trying to do the right thing instead of the true thing. But choosing you, loving you, never. Not for a single moment." He kissed me then, and I tasted promise in it, promise kept, and promise renewed. We'd built something impossible, a love that had bridged every divide, a family that had formed from broken pieces, a kingdom that was learning that strength came in forms they'd never expected. I thought of my father often, wished he could have seen this, a deaf child becoming a princess, a common girl becoming a queen, his language of gestures and silence changing the fate of a kingdom. He'd taught me that silence wasn't emptiness, and he'd been right. In the space between words, in the language of hands and hearts and choices made for love instead of fear, I'd found everything. I'd found home. Not in a place, but in people. In a daughter who'd needed someone to see her. In a man who'd needed someone to remind him he was more than his crown. In a family we'd chosen, piece by piece, word by word, sign by sign. And standing in that garden, held in the arms of the king who'd learned to speak my language, surrounded by a kingdom we'd rebuilt on foundations of acceptance and love, I knew with absolute certainty this was exactly where I belonged.